So, if you haven't watched the first episode um, of this thing that I'm doing, um, probably should just to. Well, you don't have to. Um, but the point I'm trying to get to is I'm kind of starting where I left off in that video, which was more, just talking about my early life and what influenced me and whatnot, um, leading up to, starting Mountain King and stuff. This one I wanted to talk about my my approach to design and what it is to me and all that kind of stuff, because that's I say it all the time, but it's the design part of what I do is most definitely my favorite part. It's a lot of things in one for me. It's where I get to be creative, and it's a very like personal thing. um like artwork is, it's like, it's probably sounds weird, but it's like, how I express myself. I know it's like I'm designing electronic devices, but I, like, every one of my creations is like a idea, and a like a vision or whatever, um and not just of this thing makes does this to a sound, more like it represents, like, might represent like a song that I really dig, or an image in my head or something, but it's wrapped up in that stuff, and often it's a whole bunch of things put together for me. um but what I love so much about it is it satisfies a lot of needs. And it wasn't until more recent years that I realized how connected it is with, like, my ADHD and, kind of things, cognitive, behavioral things about, and uh, neurological things about me that are, have kind of been uh, things that have hindered me in a lot of ways throughout my life, especially with like things like school and stuff. Just not, and my therapist recently has been helping me with this, to at least helping me to understand it, because she actually has ADHD as well, so she kind of understands all these things that no one else I know seems to understand, or worse, they misunderstand it and they think they understand. It's funny, people have, saying you have ADHD is like this, almost like a joke that people say, and or this unserious thing, because everyone seems to have attention problems because we're bombarded by information and stuff, but that's not the same thing as ADHD. ADHD is, it's, trust me, it's a learning disability in so many ways. And that's why when I talk to people about my knowledge of electronics, I always kind of preface it by saying, like, I don't have an orthodox understanding of it, but I understand a lot of it. But at the same time, there's, and what I'm trying to get to is, with my design work, not knowing certain things and not being taught in a very conventional way has been a huge benefit to me personally, because I end up coming up with things that are more unique than if I would have gone to school and learned Ohm's law and all this other stuff that just I've seen with other people how it like gets in the way. Like I remember um, when I first started designing, I was working at a guitar shop, and one of the techs there wasn't he kind of he was a friend of the store, and he also did like tube repair and stuff. And I think he learned electronics in like the military or something, in the Navy or something. Um, and I would, when I first started designing stuff, I would be all excited and I'd show him stuff, and he'd like literally tell me like certain circuits wouldn't work. I'm like, they do work because this is what I built. Like here, like but it was like, oh, this shouldn't go here. It's like, well, no, but it should, because that does something that it only does when you connect this to this, and that's part of what I love with designing is I get to experiment. I get to answer questions. I stare at schematics all the time of just my stuff, but other people's stuff, and I say, what is this part of the circuit doing? Like, why do I keep seeing this circuit? Why don't I keep seeing this circuit? So I end up doing little tiny experiments of like little circuits, and I say, okay, what does this do? What does this component change about this? And it's funny. I so much of what I do I can relate to playing music and being in a band and stuff like that. And when I first started playing electronics instead of playing guitar, I would play gadgets and my old Hewlett Packard 2 oscillator through pedals, and I noticed anytime when I would first start using a new piece of gear, that's when I would be the most creative. But once I got to know it well enough, and it wasn't a mystery, and I got bored with it, and the music I made with it was less inspired and stuff. And that's the way it is with my work too. It's like I keep going to the next thing and that I don't understand or I don't know, and that's when I come up with my best work. I feel. I'm gonna try to work while I'm doing this. So yeah, but it's it's this deep, exploratory thing when and I don't sit down and say, I'm going to design something that does this. That's not how I work. I simply experiment with an idea, and that leads to other ideas, and then those lead to other ideas, and I keep going and going and going, and it branches off into all these different designs eventually. And I'm always just keeping my ear attuned to very subtle changes in sound, and that kind of leads me to sounds to circuits that create sounds that I like. So instead of me setting off in a direction, the experimentation sends me in a direction, and that eventually leads me to stuff where I'm like, wow, this is something that is perfect for me. It's like, and that's the other thing is and something I've said many times, and that's that I design stuff that I like. I realized early on that that designing stuff designing things that other people are going to like, and having that be a motivation was a very bad thing, because A, it didn't satisfy needs of mine. B, your best work is going to be when you're working on something that you have a personal interest in, and it has something, it's going to bring about a personal, a thing that something that you need, I guess. And yeah, it took a while for me to get to a point where I was not beating myself up about a circuit, saying like, "Oh, this isn't good enough," and that's just part of me. That's just one of my problems with myself in general, not just this, but in life. Like, I'm too hard on myself, and in a very unnecessary way often. There it is. So it was, there was a very stressful period of my design work for a while it was good at the same time, but eventually I got my head screwed on straight, so to speak, and after that I was like, okay, this is good. And that's, when I really started, I feel like, to make a lot of progress. And it's still, there's times it's like I want to come up with a certain kind of circuit, and it just doesn't work that way, and it's frustrating sometimes because I do want it, but I know I need to wait. I need to come to it in a natural way through a process that is beyond my control. And as I've mentioned before, there's this thing that I noticed early on. Well, I didn't notice it right away. Eventually, it just came to me, but that I had to open myself up to some outside influence, and I don't know what that influence, what it is, or where it really comes from exactly, but it's something I feel is an outside intelligence, let's say, that influences my work. And maybe it's just my subconscious, like, working on something without me being conscious of it, which I guess is how your subconscious works. So that's a big part. That became letting that happen became a big part of the development of my design approach and action or whatever. Hope I don't mess up stuff because I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing here. So yeah, it's and I, a lot of, throughout all these years of designing, while what the world sees more than anything is just like fuzz panels of mine, albeit some fairly unique stuff like the frequency LSD, which I don't really consider a fuzz. It's like almost like a weird guitar synthesizer and fuzz in one kind of thing. Um, but while I've been doing that, I've been designing things more for use with electronic instruments and modular synthesizers and synth modules and stuff. Um, and that's really where I feel like, and ended up influencing my pedal design work. I mean, it's always been there because even when I started designing pedals, even though had started playing bass for a short period of time, I had already thrown myself full force into, you know, playing music with purely electronic devices, um, and not necessarily conventional stuff, but like just patched together oddball shit and, you know, mixer feedback and shit like that. I know I'm going off a little bit too much here. But where am I going with this? Oh, so my ADHD again. Um, and this goes back to what I was kind of saying about new instruments and how that influences how I play and my approach to playing music and composing or whatever you want to call it. I at some point I started to notice how my designs were such that they had two things. They had this element of uncertainty where they're the kind of things where you can keep exploring them without ever mastering them, which is what I want. And that makes them so much more exciting to me to use, but also just exciting to me as a personal kind of achievement to come up with the things I need or desire, maybe is a better word, that don't exist already, because they're, you know, as my therapist said, you know, that, you know, the world is not, and she gave me a paper that kind of was titled almost this. It's basically saying that, you know, we're living in a world that's not designed for us. Which is, it's not a pleasant thought. But the meaning, like, you know, it's when you have something like ADHD, or even like, I guess autism is connected to that. You know, the world's set up for the average person with this and this, and then when you have these other things that are thrown into the equation that are beyond your control, it kind of fucks you up. You know, it definitely fucked me up with school. Like, I just, you know, when I did horrible in school my entire life. Barely graduated high school. Actually wasn't going to graduate until like the very last day of school, actually. That's a story for another day. But you know, and always had, my teachers are always like throughout from elementary school on, over and over and over again, same thing from my teachers. Either they thought I was just a lazy, like, long-haired, you know, delinquent, or they said, Alan, you're so smart, but you don't do the work, or you don't apply this, or whatever. And I'm like, I can't focus on any of this stuff. My brain is not working like that. And when I used to do my homework, I had to sit right in front of the TV with the TV on to do my homework. If the TV wasn't on, I couldn't do it. Like it was like I got paralyzed because my brain needed, and I didn't need to look at the TV. It just needed to be on because my brain needed something to latch onto to keep busy so I could focus on something else, because that's how it often works with when you have ADHD. It's a fucking horrible thing, trust me. Like I said, whenever I hear people, use it as like, oh, I can't focus, I have ADHD. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not a, it's not like, but whatever. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. But like I said, it really has had huge influence on my work. Yeah. So, like I said, now I keep thinking / hoping that element of my designs, because a lot of these are, most of what I'm talking about is stuff that I have not released. I've been just doing behind everything else, and I'm getting ready. Like, I know I keep saying getting ready to release this stuff, and I'm hoping that other people will appreciate that aspect of them, that where you can just keep exploring, because I'm not, and one of the things I told myself early on too was that I can't worry about this group of people and what they want, because I'm not the person to design for them. I'm designing for these people. Now, hopefully everybody will appreciate it, but I know that I can't satisfy everyone, and I need to let other people design, be in charge of a certain category, or whatever, however you want to say it. So I know I know there's other people who are going to appreciate that element of having something that you can just keep exploring without ever truly mastering, and drawing on that and feeding on that to create music, as a way to create their own unique music. Yeah. And speaking of which, the dolmen, which is what the board I'm working on at the moment. This really is kind of like the pinnacle of that. It's, I worked on it for a long time, and the initial work was done in this like weird state of mind where, like, once I was done and I built the prototype, I was like, what made me do this and that? Because I'm taking, and this is another thing I want to get into about my design work, but I took a chip that was made for toys, and essentially kind of repurposed it. And as a result, I did this deep dive into this chip to just try to find what the possibilities were with it. Because right out of the gate, I was like, wow, this freaking sounds so much. When you hit a note, it sounds like a tape recorder starts playing, and the tape's like deteriorated, and the machine is broken, and it's just incredible and terrifying. And then I went and, there's even, and maybe this won't make sense to a lot of, but there's pins on certain chips, and they're not meant to be used for the main purpose of the circuit. They're test points for when they're built. They're testing the chip out in the factory. They're, I don't claim they really even know how they test it with those pins. Anyway, I say, well, something's going on there. Let me take a listen to it, quite literally, like listen what's going on at that pin. And that led me to one of the features on the Dolman. But I kept designing it, and because I design it in a open kind of way, I don't know a better way to word it, but when I design everything this way, so that there's once I go and prototype the device, I realize there's things about it that I don't know. That there's like uses, there's functions, there's all this, there's sounds that I don't know it can do because I just put in a feature that allows for other things for some reason. That probably doesn't, none of that probably makes any sense, but whatever. Where is, okay. So one of the things, and this is something when I was thinking about doing this video, one of the things that I was planning to say first. But that is, when I first started designing, I had a bunch of kind of limitations now that I think about it. And this isn't necessarily something I consider a limitation, but it's along that line. But, well, it sort of is. When I first started, and this is part of having ADHD, I need order, I need certain things to focus, because otherwise my brain just like goes off in all these directions, and I like get paralyzed. I can't do anything. It sucks. It's the reason why I've had substance abuse problems in my life. Not now, but most of my life. Because I had to self-medicate and sedate my brain so that I could focus. Strangely enough, it's like it's why when I was a kid, I would go to parties, I would drink tons. Everybody else would get trashed, and then I would be fine, and they'd be like, "Alan, why aren't you drinking?" I'm like, "I drank more than all of you fuckers." I said, "This just brings me down to like a normal level, and then from there, I can get trashed." Anyway, so when I first started, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on just making effects for bass players, because that's what led me to start designing, because I was looking for distortion, fuzz for bass, and there was so few that there wasn't that many, and there wasn't that, and this is, early 2000s, there wasn't that many out there, and then the ones that were didn't really do the job anyway. So it led me to designing my own, and so I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to focus on, because that's a area that I'm interested in, and that is the world is lacking. And I wanted to use technology, and this goes back to the first episode of this more. Wanted it to be technology that existed in like in the 70s, like within up until like late 70s. Um, and I was focusing mainly on just discrete transistorized circuits. And part of that was a challenge, but part of it is this thing that I've had for a good chunk of my life, um, where I want to surround myself with things that remind me of like the good part of my life, which was my early childhood. Um, because after about around age 12, everything went fucking shit. So I've been, you know, it's why I'm interested in all things from the 70s, whether it's house decor, or, you know, the 70s plastic cups that I used to drink out of, or the funky clothes that my dope ass pleather jacket and my other super dope ass uh, London Fog or whatever brand it is, corduroy winter jacket that I love. It's like this beautiful brown and needs some repairs, um, but I also, like it's a way, it's like this time machine effect, um, that these things, surrounding myself with them and diving into them, um, and it's not so much a conscious thing. It's just as I went through life, I realized like that's why people. My one friend used to like call me the man that time forgot because everything. It's like, um, so I wanted, I long for this time periods, and I would have loved to been old enough in like the late 70s, like 78, 79, or whatever, to be old enough to have designed it then. And because, the stuff that I use now, even a lot of these chips, not all of them, but, I love all these special purpose chips and finding new ways to use them that they were never necessarily intended for, or finding, I call it cracking their code, where I figure out some like crazy awesome thing that they can do that they weren't intended to do, along with using them for the function that they were intended for. Um, so all this stuff, like I said, it has all these different aspects to it. It's just like a personal achievement kind of thing to me. It's this, you know, satisfying my ADHD brain. It's putting me into a headspace that's a positive one by like connecting me with like my early childhood. Um, it's all this stuff, and that's why it's like I'm so into it. Like, just it's my life, man. I say all the time, I live and breathe this shit. Like, morning till night. Like, literally, I fall asleep with schematics all over the place. I wake up with like pen marks like all over my body because I end up I always use these very like inky pens for my schematics, and I draw them and redraw them, and like if I screw up something, I like toss it and I redraw it again. It's like this crazy thing, and I do it like in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm up doing this, and I have to do it before I go to sleep because I'll just think about it too much. And I have this, experimenter thing. This, call them like designers or trainers or whatever. Um, on this coffee table right next to my bed with speakers set up, and it's like I've been working. There's one circuit, one giant like synthesizer, like tabletop synthesizer circuit that I've been working on for past few years, and just I will just sit there and play it and play it and play it and tweak stuff and then put it back to the way it was and write notes and just go and go and go and just like I don't push it, you know. I don't push any of this stuff. If I rush it, it just doesn't work. It makes me extremely unhappy, it makes me super stressed. So I just let shit happen. Now, I want to finish this stuff up and get it out there, or I just want it to be done. I have like 12, not 12, but 7, 8 giant breadboards full of multiple circuits. I have them in these Tupperware containers, um, and I leave those circuits on there until I'm completely done designing them. Um, you know, I still have the dolman on there because I'll have ideas sometimes. Like, let me try this to see if this is somehow better than this. And I actually, it's weird. I tried, and this is one of the things I love about um, designing. I made this small change to the circuit, and I'm gonna do a video just about the dolman, and it's gonna be about the process that led me to its design. But am I still recording? Yeah. Okay. I made a small change recently. It's just I changed the value of a pot. Very small change because I thought it just would bring up the other knob and brings in this. It's actually it brings in this signal from one of the test pins of there, and there's this lo-fi, distorted, super noisy version of whatever you put into the chip. You know, the audio you put into it. And it had this weird. And when it first happened, I was like, "Uh-oh, I fucked it up," because when I first applied it to an actual one of the built dolmens, did this weird thing when I turned it up and I switched on this one artifact switch. It got all like gated and crumbly and weird. I was like, what the hell? And I was like, oh, maybe I should switch it back. But then I was experimenting. I'm like, no, this is just another thing that it does when you, because, and you can defeat that and just have it be, you know, what it was before, except you can go a little bit farther with this now. And so, you know, it's awesome. It's, you know, it's very much this cerebral world, like this world, inner world that I get to. That's just me going and exploring, and you know, it's like some kind of like far out like fantasy epic that I'm, you know, involved with. All right, what am I doing here? So I really wanted to get these thoughts, these ideas of the time down. You know, that's kind of like the main purpose of this series, is for me to, because, you know, again, because of my ADHD, if things aren't like present and repetitive, I forget them very easily. It just gets pushed up into the back of my head by all these other thoughts and all these other avenues of thought. So I figure you know, there's times where I'm like, I get so far from where I was that I forget this, and I'm like, oh crap, wait a minute. Like, you know, that's one of the reasons why I write down schematics and redraw them, and I don't get rid of the old version of the circuit schematic, because I know that's the worst thing I could do, because I know I'm gonna want to go back to it, and I have. It's like, I'm like, oh shit, wait, I forgot this used to do this too. why isn't it doing that anymore? And I have to go, and that's why I leave it on the breadboard too. Like the dolman, it did this thing on the breadboard, and it did this thing on one of the prototypes, or the first or second prototype, that the new version didn't. I was like, what the hell is this? Like, and I was like, it was the worst feeling when I realized that, and it's just weird squealy noise, like way in the background that it does. And I was so hyper focused on so many other things, again, because ADHD, that I forgot about it. And um, I went through the circuit on the breadboard, and I'm like, there's nothing different. Every component is exactly the same. Everything is, I'm meticulous about that shit. And I realized, one of the problems with doing stuff on a breadboard, because it's not perfect, is a couple things. There's thing called capacitance. So there's just the breadboard itself. There's a connection between stuff that isn't physically connected. It's not connected, but there's a pathway to it essentially. But there's also just got all these wires and crazy, when I breadboard, it's wild scene, man. And I realized that these wires from the input preamp were close to this other point in the circuit, and it was feeding back because it was so sensitive. So what I did was I made a toggle switch that connects literal antennas that are winding through the circuit, like wires that I wrap around through all this shit. And when you flick it on, it picks up all this interference, and it creates this crazy shit, man. And it does it to an extreme that it doesn't do on the breadboard. Like, that's one of the, when I was talking about that change I made to the pot and that gated thing, it's when I flick on one of the antennas. There's two different antennas. There's this one long one and one wrapped around like a crystal core and all kinds of crazy shit. And it does weird stuff, and it does something even crazier that you're gonna have to watch the Dolman video for me to show you. And I didn't even realize this till like a week ago, but it's just so bizarre. um and it's awesome because I'm always like coming up with things or noticing certain things. I'm like, why don't I know about this already? Why isn't someone else talked about this? And it's because there are new things to be had. And this is another part, and I'm just gonna keep going with it. I might as well. There, I've noticed with technology, you hear people say all the time, there's nothing new under the sun. You can't, it's all been done, blah, blah, blah. That's bullshit. That's uncreative people saying that shit. Because, and this is, part of the nature of human beings, is people don't fully explore avenues of technology. They go along, and people are, real intense exploring it. And as soon as something new comes along, a new device or a new part or whatever, they're like, boom, off with that, and they abandon this other shit. So it never gets completely, thoroughly explored. So I'm the one that's, fuck it, I'm like, I'm going there, man. I'm going to find out what this chip can really do. And I come up with, like, it's part that, and then part what I was talking about earlier, where people like, oh, you're not supposed to do this. It's like, well, no, sometimes you're not. Like, I've blown up all kinds of stuff. I've had fire, literal fire come out of my breadboard from hooking up things the wrong way or the right way, or just making simple mistakes or whatever. But I've come up with some things, and this is one of the things that I've carried over from the early part of my design work is I love trying to make things as simple as possible. I want them to do the most complex things with the least amount of parts. And I don't mean it, I do that to a fault where it's like I'm not going to allow something to happen because but it's a way of discovering magic essentially. Like I believe like magic, like real magic exists, but it's not what a lot of people think it is. I think it's tilting something a way that you haven't tilted it before, and suddenly you discover something, and you need to be one of those people that does that looks at things from a very different perspective to find this stuff. um and I think I do that, and I think it I don't think it's something I have control over. I think it's just the way my head is built. um and like I said, most of the time it causes me problems, but in this case it works. And I guess that's again one of the reasons why I'm so into this. It just, like, my screwed up brain actually works when it comes to this stuff. um but yeah, I love just coming up. It's one of the reasons why I love, like, passive electronics. I've come up with, like, I have this one module. I have this passive module that's like a multi-purpose thing that does so much weird, crazy shit that you would never, ever think that a passive module can do, like wave folding and octave division. And now it's subtle. It's not like an active module would do those things, but it's still bonkers nonetheless. And part of what I love about having, like, a very simple signal path is, for one, the output of the circuit is carries over so much of the parameters of the input often, like dynamics or whatever. um, and also, like, every little component in those simple circuits, especially the more complex thing they do, every component makes a huge difference. Like, very small variations in a value of a component will make a huge difference. So that's why I'm just psychotic about, like, tweaking, like, every part to get it just right, or just whatever sounds the best to me, or however you want to say it. And like, it's that's also part of just an achievement part of it for me. Like, I need to, like, feel good about myself about something, and this, my work is the thing that I can actually feel like I've accomplished something, something that's important. Being able to hand people, and that's the other part of this that I love. That's a big a lot of this is a very personal thing that's not about other people, but that's the other part, is that I'm it's two things. I'm giving people unique tools that will hopefully spark their own unique creativity. um and also, I feel like I'm a part of that creative process when they use something, a piece of my artwork, essentially, or a piece of my self-expression is going into what they do. And that makes me feel like I'm a part of things, and I'm helping, and I'm interacting, and that's something else that I need, you know. And then I just love that this work, just I meet all these awesome people as a result and become friends with them, and you know, just get that, you know, network of other beings that I'm connected with is just awesome. So, and with that, I'm gonna leave. Um, Talk about more stuff another episode, but well, if you made it this far, congratulations. I don't have any prizes for you, but maybe one of you who also has ADHD, this helped focus or take up time or whatever you need, it gave you at least a little bit of. So, all right.